Gen AI with Scott Forsyth.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies that are building mission-critical software systems. Quick announcement, we are in the second year, almost halfway through, second year of my architect forums, and you can sign up at the link in the show notes. If you lead a software team or are looking to collaborate with other peer software architects, then just go ahead and sign up for those. And it's a group of peers, an advisory board of sorts. And for those who are looking for Programming with Palermo, my video podcast, you can just search for it in any of the directories and you'll be able to find it. My guest today on the show is Scott Forsyth. Scott has spent over 25 years in the IT field working in disciplines such as systems architecture, software development, team growth, and entrepreneurship. And he was a Microsoft MVP for 12 years in ASP.NET and IIS. And he's co-authored 2 books on IIS 7 and IIS 8 Professional are the 2 books. And he's also a Pluralsight author. He's spoken at various conferences over the years and code camps and user groups and all kinds of other venues. And he's now shifted into the artificial intelligence space, building AI solutions and supporting others in their AI journey. He's also co-founding a new startup, so he's spending much of his time as an entrepreneur. Scott, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Good, doing great. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Awesome. And you and I have known each other for a long time, going all the way back to hosting, and you've done so much coming from web hosting that you've gone deeper than so many people that I know about just how to put things online. Before we get into that, I just want to kind of back up and ask, you're kind of in the artificial intelligence space coming from the systems architecture and development angle, but what are the high points in your career that you think kind of steered you into working on what you're working on today?
Yeah. Well, good question. I kind of have 2 decade periods. On the early 2000s or so, I had about a decade in the hosting space, and that's where we worked a lot together, various different hosting things. I was involved in some of the early phases, even maturing the IIS platform way back when it hasn't really changed in the last few years. It's so mature now, but it definitely wasn't in the early days. And so I did that about a decade. In fact, we hosted customers like Microsoft themselves before they had policy to do everything internal and built their own systems. So we had a chance to work through that whole process with them. And then I had another decade in the software delivery space and our solutions delivery. We did e-commerce solutions for B2B and B2C customers, always integrating with ERPs. So mostly the Microsoft Dynamics stack. So I did that for 11 years, a CTO there, and developing our team. But we were small enough, I got to do a lot of hands-on as well. So I kind of like that balance of a lot of hands-on, but also the team leadership and growth and that too. And I guess that leads to the last 8 or 9 months, I've moved out on my own. And the first 2 months I said, I'm just going to jump in. I'm at a good time in life. The kids are out of the house and I have a little bit of a runway where I can just do this shift. And AI, it's kind of like the gold rush of tech right now. And just to jump in and at the time, I'd worked with GitHub Copilot, and I had worked with ChatGPT just for a few months, and GitHub Copilot for about a year at that time. This is just middle of last year, but really, I had almost no idea on AI, and really, there's just so much there, and how does this work? The magic behind it, and everything else. And so I just jumped in and spent a couple months on that, not making any decisions at all. A few opportunities came my way, but decided not to do that. And then things evolved from there. I teamed up starting a co-founding a business. Maybe I'll mention that later on. And but really, the largest focus I've had is really around AI or using AI to work with some other technologies and different things that I do. So that's been a high overview, I guess.
I want to call out something that just gets a lot of play these days, and that's the concept of a full stack developer, in contrast to someone who might only work on web user interfaces and go deep there, but then not really mess with anything that runs on the server behind the scenes, invisible, and then databases. But then there's networks and there's servers and there's infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at you, like, you're the true full stack developer, because even the quote full stack developers out there, they still don't go deep into the systems engineering and the networking and the cloud. It stops at the code, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like your experience has been the whole stack. How did that happen? Because that's rare.
Right. Well, the further along I go, the more I realize that I don't know. So there's so much of that for sure. But yeah, it's evolved that way. It was great to be kind of on the systems architecture for all those years, being part an MVP. The first few years, they paid for everything. Even flights. I think the first year, if I remember correctly, and then later on, all the hotels were always covered and everything else. And to be part of some of the insider programs, so that just really opened up a lot of doors. And being part of those too, as you do it, you work with the early, sometimes alpha builds and then beta builds and progress through that. I always did some scripting because you want to automate as much as possible. So in those days, it was WMI, ADSI. This is before PowerShell, before it was standardized. So some technologies, sometimes command line was the only way to interface with it. And it was amazing later on when they started to have a PowerShell first. And so everything had to have an API or some way to interact with it. But wow, way back in the days, you'd have to screen scrape kind of command line prompts to be able to automate certain things. And so I had that combination of hands-on with the real passion to do some of the software development in that too. And then that evolved into, the last approximately a decade of doing the software, the actual, software development with a team around me and that too. So yeah, it just, I don't know if you plan all these things in advance. A lot of times they come naturally on just what doors open for you as you do it. And if you get opportunities to explore the things that you're passionate about and work a lot of late evenings on the things that if my daytime didn't give me much time to do it, the evenings let me really play with different technologies and that too. And that's how it worked out over time.
Nice. This current phase in the career, you're focusing on generative AI, but before we kind of dive into there, the space is so big and it's moving so fast. We have to define kind of the slice, because the landscape is kind of broad and it seems like it's getting more broad and what's lumped under the artificial intelligence umbrella. So how do you think about the different categories? And then how did you decide on what part of it to focus on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. At some point, I almost wanted to visualize it on paper, and I haven't sat down to do that yet. And I haven't seen an ideal one because you have everything. In fact, it's kind of interesting. I'm hanging out with one group and meet with them on approximately a weekly basis, and they are non-technical, but they're joining the AI space, and it's mind-blowing for them because they call themselves now technical. Right? Because AI now with the prompting and stuff like that, you can achieve very technical type things, but a non-technical person is able to do that. So AI really starts, you have at that level, just simple prompting. And actually, to be honest, probably 70% of what I do is just leveraging the tools for my day-to-day work. And there's that. There's also a lot of implementing things like text to speech, speech to text, a lot of taking what you have then and manipulating, go back to an API and saying, can I get an answer for this? Or can you categorize this correctly? Or that type of stuff. Then there's the deeper too, is the ones that are actually building the systems themselves for AI. Those who are building the models or building the tools to expose it or creating the Python libraries and stuff like that are people using. So really, and I'm just touching parts of it too, there's just so many rich tools, marketing tools and things like that leverage AI, but it has a pretty face. It doesn't look like AI, but it's really all the AI behind the scenes. So it's almost like computers. People say, oh, you're in computers. Can you help me with this area here? Well, yeah, maybe, but that's not what I do on my day to day. It's the same idea. It's just so vast. when you say AI, yeah, you asked a good question. It means so many different things.
Well, you have a good point about the users or power users who are doing some pretty interesting things. And I look at even Excel or Power BI, people who've never written a line of code in their life. Well, if you've written a complex Excel formula, then that kind of flows into some procedural programming at times. But there's a whole lot of people who are whizzes at Excel, and they can connect from there to various databases and pull in information and slice and dice it, where they might never have written any structured programming, let alone
Mm-hmm.
object-oriented programming or an actual custom piece of software. But they're doing some interesting things just even at the power user level. And there's so many tools that seem to be coming out that I can't keep up with it. We're probably going to see that. But so what slice of it, when you say, okay, you're the next, you've shifted into the AI space, what are you thinking, okay, I'm going to be horizontal and know about everything, or are you picking a certain thing to go deep?
Yeah. Well, I'd say it's kind of horizontal, touching a bunch of things with certain gaps. There's certain things I realize, okay, I just haven't played with that area yet, and I'll wait till I have enough of a need or feel like I'm going to have some playtime for that. But certain things I'm able to go deeper and understand it more, really hang out in it more space. Just this week was an interesting one. Flowise is an open source tooling. You can and basically you can architect the whole AI. So you can say, okay, I'm going to, let's say, create a chatbot. You can use RAG. So if you want to enrich it with, your local Word documents or Excel or your database or anything else. But it's so neat because you can kind of piece it together. You can say, okay, if this one was a negative sentiment, then let's reply with this AI type of response. Or if we realize that they're actually asking about something unrelated, we can now kind of pivot and do something different with a different AI or a different method and stuff like that. So that whole orchestration of AI is pretty amazing too. And so that's one example of what I'm working on. I have been kind of doing a little bit of many different things. Another thing, for example, is a chatbot, and trying to make that as smooth and interactive as possible. So you start talking as fast as possible. You need to take that text to speech, and or I should say speech to text in that case, and then get an answer back, and then turn that back again to voice and play that back to the user. This is on a mobile app, and then all the little nuances with it too. Like, can you interrupt it? Well, the problem with interrupting it is then all of a sudden you have this echo issue. If you're playing it at the same time as trying to listen to yourself, you have to be able to add that the echo cancellation throughout the process. And so that's kind of a combination of some technologies as well as AI in each of those parts. They talk about multimodality, right? So you have text, but you have speech to text and text to speech, and all of those have really come to the forefront recently.
You mentioned two things. You said Flowise. Is that FlowiseAI.com?
In the middle. It's actually Flowise. So it's FLOW or FLOWISE AI.com.
Build large language model apps easily.
Yeah.
And is that, I see a GitHub repository. Is that open source? Or is that a product?
Yep, it's open source. Actually, they mentioned that they're backed by Y Combinator, which is interesting because I'm not sure how they monetize that yet. But yeah, you download it to your local machine. So it's all, and then there's you can deploy it later. So it's not a hosted model; it's local, but you can tap into OpenAI, Claude, any of these type of models that are available, or the open source ones, and then orchestrate the different things. One of the things I need to do is pull from a website. So someone asks something, it goes to the website, pulls the information back, and then can process and do what you want with it, and then output it in a structured JSON that meets a certain schema definition. And so you can piece all that together.
Got it. So Flowise, is that a JavaScript app? Looks like there's a lot of JavaScript.
I'm not sure what they're doing on the front end. I think it's like a React type.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually it really lends itself very much to the low code, no code. And so what I was doing prior, because I've only been hanging out with this for the last week, prior to that, most things I've been doing is just direct code. you make a call, get the response, move on to the next thing. But this just helps you orchestrate the whole thing, drag and drop, piece the little inputs to the outputs, and wire it all up. And then if you want to make a change, you can visualize it. It's pretty amazing.
Nice. And you also mentioned RAG, which we got to define what that is, because there's a lot of people that are getting up on the new jargon.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So there's a few ways. So let's say that one of the things you'll see in ChatGPT, for example, is it will say my latest update is as of, and you've seen that the last year and a half, and usually it's back some months. And so what if you want to, so you have a couple issues. One is it's stale, a moment in time. The other is, what if you want to enrich it with your own internal data, your own private data, or might be public data, but it's data that it doesn't have. So RAG stands for retrieval augmented generation. And it's one of the methods. So originally there was kind of the buzz around fine tuning. You can take an existing, either an open source model or even the large ones like OpenAI will let you fine tune them. But that's fairly resource intensive. It takes, so it has some value, but there's been a lot more traction on RAG, which basically what that means is, as you ask a question, let's say a particular user asks a question, we'll just use a chatbot as an example, and what it detects your intent, what you're trying to do, it then goes back to, it's pre-processed, it's stored these as a vector database, let's say your internal business operations, and includes that with the query, with the request itself. Then the large model that's responding has both the question, the enriched RAG information, as well as its own brains, everything that it has, and gives back an intelligent response. So it's a way to have your own business logic or anything that's needed added on top, and in more real time. It's really what that's meant to do.
Now, I don't know behind the scenes, but I'm wondering, you think that's the way that Windows Copilot works, where you can ask it about the weather? Is it calling a weather web service and then just putting the JSON response into the request?
Yep. Yeah, I believe that's exactly how they do it. And you have function calling in that too. So it can tell the intent first, and based on the intent, it can call different type of functions. They call it functions, or tools is the new term for it. And it can go out, like you said, go to a web service and get the answer and then respond back to a user. Another example that you'll see often is code interpreter. So it can generate some code, because as you know, large language models are terrible at math. It's just based on seeing a whole bunch of examples. It doesn't actually do it itself. But what it can do very well is, let's generate some code that will give you a quick answer to that math. Or, so then it's able to do that on the way through. And that's all part of that flow of either RAG or at least enrichment with some extra function calling.
Now, you said something just casually, because you've already gotten deeper into this than a lot of people. You said, now, of course, large language models are terrible at math. How does one find that out? Because I don't see any of the people that are marketing AI saying, this is what AI is not good at.
Right.
So how did you learn that? And what are the other things that it's not good at?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it is just a matter of various different blogs or podcasts or research or whatever, was where I come to know that. But there are, because it's pre-trained. So really, it's called pre-training is what happens in advance, and then when you make a query, that's called inference. So that's where it gets the answer back on what is pre-trained. It doesn't really process with inference, it figures it out, but it's based on the pre-training. And one of the things is math. It doesn't have. But here's one of the things that really throws me off with, as someone who's been in the tech space and programming and everything else, is AI is so non-deterministic. I think that's the right term for it. And we're used to, in the past, with typical programming, if you do something, you do the same thing over and over and over, it's identical.
Right.
There's occasional bug or there's occasional hiccup because of a network service is down that you have to handle for. But for the most part, if you test it and it passes all your tests, it's going to do the same over and over again. Well, generative AI is not. And it's a whole mindset change, because it is all about, in fact, on purpose, it tries to randomize certain things and to give you a different answer. That's how it gets creative. That's how it can write poems. That's how it can, figure these things out by saying, well, here's the most likely X amount of responses. Let's randomly choose any one of those responses as it generates. And it does that actually token by token or approximately word by word, right? As it gives you the response, it gives you like the next word. Then it parses everything so far and gives you the next most likely word.
Mm-hmm.
And as it does so, there's some randomization in there. And it just makes this whole thing, it's kind of odd for programmers because it's not predictable every time.
Yeah.
And then worse, I mean, it's amazing how it is, right? It's just one of these things you have to consider, but it's a paradigm shift for us technical people. But then you see certain things like ChatGPT. I think that they're really kind of patching the airplane as it flies sometimes.
Yeah.
They don't have that same desire for always up that you have like our electricity or internet or something like that. And you can tell they're kind of experimenting with things. That's why they said, I remember a few months ago, is ChatGPT getting lazy? All of a sudden it starts responding different than it always has in the past. And it doesn't, you ask for some code help and it keeps swapping out different things with your code here. It doesn't actually kick it back and things like that because they're kind of experimenting. So things that you learn to trust in, you don't know for sure if it's going to get the same answer back. But that's part of the new world, generative AI. And I think the success is going to be the combination of traditional programming with the generative AI, and the new evolutions of it get stronger and stronger.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery. ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
So you mentioned the pre-trained nature, hence the GPT generative pre-trained transformer.
Mm-hmm.
And we got the other piece of jargon, LLM, large language model.
Yeah.
Is there like a standard stack? Is it always the model and then the GPT on top of it? Or is there any that is the large language model that is not GPT? Like what's the stack
Right.
and how do these things fit together?
Yeah. So actually, machine learning is still a lot of things that you see today is not even generative AI. So generative AI came out. Google released something from their DeepMinds department in 2017. I think it's called "Attention is All You Need," something similar to that. And what that did is it opened up some ideas. People started working with it, and then all of a sudden, when ChatGPT or OpenAI released, I think it was version 2 or so, it was so large, there's so much data that we're saying this is starting to feel like human in that. And it just really opened everyone's eyes. And especially when ChatGPT 3.5 came out to the public, then it became known. So yeah, you're going to see generative AI, most of the things you're seeing now for the general conversation, the chat, image gen, video gen, all of those are based on that same generative AI concepts. It builds a model. The models contain a few things, like it has its own dictionary embedded with the model, what words work, and various different language, spoken languages, as well as internal languages and that too. But you also have a lot of traditional machine learning as well, which is not that. And it has, that can really, so I think if you use a lot of tools that say they have AI, it might not always be generative AI. But I think to sum it up, most of that's kind of catching our attention right now, the conversational AI, those things that are generating new things, is all based on the one common architecture at the moment. Got it.
Okay. So you got the large language model, which that's been around a longer time because of machine learning. And then the GPT, is it right to call it an algorithm? What do you call GPT?
Right. Yeah. I was always kind of wondering, I say a chatbot, I guess, is on top. Well, the GPT itself, foundational
the transformer.
Model.
Okay, so there's a programmer on top of a program on top of the large language model that you interact with. I was playing around with Llama Sharp also, because you mentioned Flowise. Llama Sharp was a C Sharp one. Have you tinkered with that a bit?
I haven't done Llama Sharp, no.
Because I was searching for, okay, give me one where all the code is in C Sharp. Thinking, okay, what should the .NET developer look at? What's going to be the most native? So we'll include a link of that in the show notes. But I was talking to Mark Miller, who was a guest on the show, and he thinks a lot about user interfaces. And one of the ideas that he kind of talked about, just made my eyes light up, is these forms where you have to put all these pieces of information in the right text box, and some are drop downs, and some are radio buttons, and some are free form. So many times it's just your name and address. But I'm thinking, shouldn't it not take a very big model at all just to be able to take spoken word and just freeform say, I'm Jeffrey Palermo and my address is 1313 Mockingbird Lane, Springfield, Illinois, whatever it happens to be. And it just populate a form. Is that, I mean, do you know if that's an easy or a hard problem for these things?
No, you're onto something. And in fact, that kind of gets the rise of an SLM, a small language model.
Okay.
And you're seeing some of that too, because the large language model is so absolutely impressive because it's a good generalist. It can do so many different things. But if you strip it out and pull just one language, let's say English, and remove a lot of different things. So we're just focusing on really just the language, the natural language processing to do that type of stuff. You can actually start to use that in a mobile phone. Your mobile phone can process it. And that's the goal. You're seeing Apple and Android and a lot of different, the Apple agreements trying to get the models fit on an actual device itself. You're seeing, you saw the announcement there with the Microsoft Surface Plus and the laptop to be able to have everything embedded right within it. So the small language models let you specialize. You can start with and that's what a lot of the open source ones do too. They start with a smaller model, and then you can enrich it with RAG or fine tuning on top of it that has a very specific purpose. And then it's much faster. It's much less expensive for inference. Inference is extremely expensive. You go to ChatGPT 4 and you see how long it takes, and it kind of streams it as it comes through.
Yeah,
that's actually very, very expensive, all things considered, to generate. So yeah, the small language models, I think you're going to see a lot of them come and have many, many benefits too.
Well, I'm just thinking, you mentioned non-deterministic, and I'm just thinking software developers in our team, we rely so much on automated testing. If we're going to put something in a software application, we have to have it be deterministic. And so if we're going to automate something, it's one thing to make a quote co-pilot or assistant where you're just getting advice and the human is going to take it or leave it. But if we're embedding it in the program, we have to make it deterministic in some way. And like that, if we're able to put in a whole bunch of examples of a WAV file and then test, did all of these examples properly populate the form? Well, now we've made it deterministic. We've made it so narrow that, am I thinking about it the right way?
Yeah. No, for sure. And it depends on what the task is too. So you can, anytime you're doing like an API call, you can change certain things like the temperature. You drop the temperature down to 0, and that's really meant to say what's the most likely path all the way through. It's predictable. So if you're trying to output something with a JSON format, or you're trying to structure something or take something, well, I was going to say actually bad example, summarize. And that's the opposite. But yeah, you can kind of tweak that. So if you want something that's very predictable, like generating lists or generating something in a certain format, you can achieve that quite well. And then, but I've heard talking to one person, he had hundreds of tests just to test very simple things over, all these different nuances. And he says, well, now I'm changing the model because they're changing so fast. And all of a sudden, half of those tests break. And so then there's just so much effort that goes into it. So it is a big consideration, and you just kind of have to balance the benefit that you get from it. Why use generative AI versus traditional programming? If you want something very deterministic and very predictable, you can still use traditional programming.
Yeah.
But if you want to benefit from some of these other things, no, you're exactly right. And it's going to take, and actually there's a lot of platforms and tools out there too that will help with that automated testing, regression testing, and stuff like that to make it easier to do, especially when you get into audio and video and other modalities as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned co-founding a new startup. Is there anything shareable about that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I'm kind of been in stealth mode until now. We're just ready to release to the marketplace next week. And so this has kind of been a parallel thing and now shifting into full time. It's called Kitchen Copilot. And it kind of, the name reflects what it does, inspired actually by GitHub Copilot. And it really meets the need. How many people are there that they either spend a lot of time every week doing their planning and they do not enjoy it? A lot of people are still doing it in Google Sheets, or they get frustrated, they don't do it at all. And as a result, they just get into stagnant, they last minute deciding what to do, and food expires and all that type of stuff. So it really pulls all of these together, the planning, the recipe creation, the ordering, the whole set of things. So kitchencopilot.com, we have our splash page, and we're going live in a couple of weeks. It's a mobile app for now. Later on, we'll have desktop in that also. And this is our MVP. We're excited with the MVP, but there's so many more things later on, talking about like video object detection. Use your camera and scan your fridge and pantry and automatically know what items you have, and use that for those type of things.
Nice.
We'll be able to grow into as well. And so
So everything is running on a smartphone, or do you use some cloud services or a cloud model?
Well, both. So everyone it's a mobile app, but behind the scenes. And so this is actually in Flutter, which is Google's multi-platform language in that, and using what's called Supabase, which makes it very easy in the background for developing, doing a database schema, authentication, and all of that. And that becomes the back end as a service. So there are some web services, and one of the web services that I've done to expose is if you're talking about DevOps and stuff like that, it has the blue, green testing and all that kind of stuff with my Azure Functions. But it does a recipe from a URL. You can paste a URL from any of the common sites, and it automatically pulls it in, transforms it into the right schema, and makes that available. And then your own collection or cookbook on the app has that. So you can build your own library of common recipes that doesn't have to be just the 400,000 that we provide. It can have in any recipe that you find on the internet.
Nice. And so is this using one of the small language models locally?
No, not as of yet.
Okay.
So it's using traditional mobile app, what we have in the infrastructure. I do have the possibility for the voice and wake word, for example. That is a very small language model. So you can, when you talk to it with the voice, you can say, we call it Keiko. So Keiko, if you want to, start listening, or Keiko, what's my next step? That idea. So that does use a small language model locally. It's one example, and there will be more coming later on. But
What cloud model did you choose?
By model, you mean like an architecture? What platform?
Yes, I mean I'm not familiar with all of them, but I've seen the Meta ones, the Azure ones, the Google ones, and what service are you connecting to run the model?
Yeah, I gotcha. So Supabase itself uses a PostgreSQL backend, and it has its own. It's hosted. I think it's AWS on its own, and it's prepared to be able to scale up in that as well. The one REST service that I exposed, which is the URL from a recipe from URL, that's actually on Azure Functions. And because I looked at that, I said, what is going to be my cost? To spin up a machine, and especially during development, we don't need it all the time.
Right.
It's going to cost, I don't know, let's say $100 a month, $200 a month right? What's the best way now that I could do something that I don't need to use too often?
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, let's see. Yeah, Azure Functions makes perfect sense. In fact, I just got a bill that's maybe 4 or 5 months ago, and actually, so Microsoft has a great program. So does Amazon AWS for Microsoft for startups. So you get a first year, a whole bunch of services for free, about a year and a half and stuff like that. And so we get some of that with Azure. And so the price was, at first, I didn't see how to determine the price. It was kind of hidden for me.
Yeah.
I did eventually figure that out, but I got a warning. I said, well, you're at $500. And I knew that some of these things are fractions of a penny. And really, it was part of it. I'm using the API management service,
Okay.
which is really cool. If you can limit how many API requests come in to protect it and stuff like that. And that itself, that's fairly expensive. It's a bit over $100 a month. I didn't realize that, which is right now I'm not paying for it. It doesn't matter. And later on, hopefully we have the scale. It doesn't matter. But the actual Azure functions, I think it cost 11 cents so far in the last 4 months. So,
yeah.
and now wakes up to one of the concerns at first is how long does it take to wake up? But it really wakes up in a second or two. And for someone pasting in the URL and getting back a recipe, we don't really mind that second or two to wake up. So it became an amazing solution, a stateless solution, easy to deploy. You would be proud of me. It's all with GitHub nice. Actions and all deployed properly. So you check it into Git, it pushes it out to a staging environment, and you validate everything. And then it's a blue-green. So then you just say, okay, let's now make that live. And so, it actually is an amazing experience. And then talking about AI, getting up to speed on that. In the past, you're having to read a few documents and some things are not relevant and everything else. You can just ask AI, okay, I need to do this particular thing. How do I do it? There's a checklist. Here's your steps that you should do. And it's going to be 80%, 90% accurate. Occasionally some missteps, but that's okay because you're going through, well, that didn't work. Okay, step number 4, can you explain that a bit further? Then all of a sudden you have more details than 4. So it became a real fun process to put that up.
Awesome. Yeah. That sounds pretty cool. And yeah, you're right. Functions, the services that can scale to 0. I think those are the and that versus the other ones like the API management, where just to have it on is this price. So, well, very cool, very cool.
Yep.
So if this show comes out in a couple weeks from recording, then they should be able to see it in the app stores, right?
Very close. I think it takes, they say, 11 days for the Apple Store. So if it's out next week, so very close, right around that time. So yeah, kitchencopilot.com or .ai, and should have a link, or I just go to the App Store, search for Kitchen Copilot.
And this is going to be iOS first or both at the same time?
Both. That's the nice thing about working with Flutter. Perfect. So both of those would be at the same time.
All right. So listeners, if you go and you're one of the early ones and it didn't quite hit, just give it a few days and try again.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some feedback from anyone too, or it's a rapid iteration and change right now. So
I'll be trying it out because my wife and I have those discussions all the time. Let's just plan these, and then there's all these meal services that want to send you prepackaged and whatnot. And we've actually tried 4 of them, and the portion sizes are small. They're not terribly good, and they're the same price per meal as like going to a restaurant. And I'm like, what's the point?
Right.
So I'm looking forward to trying it out. This is a great idea.
Good. Yeah. Love to hear.
Well, before we close out, is there any other projects that, .NET developers that are wanting to start tinkering around with generative AI that they should know about?
Well, good question. There's a big theme in the no-code, low-code now too.
Okay.
And it's interesting. So us that like to be technical and have that background, we can leverage that, which is great. But sometimes you can just do these things almost like the Flowise. Another big one is Zapier and Make. 2 ones there, and they're really powerful to automate a lot of things too. So send an email to it, it processes, or a new line comes in an Excel document. It can take that and then do stuff, drop it off into another system, notify someone, parse it through OpenAI, all of those things. I think they have over 6,000. Zapier has over 6,000 different integrations, from 6,000 to any other 6,000 essentially. And I actually did, as kind of in this process, doing some consulting also, and implemented 5 custom ones into different systems. And so it's neat to see that from the inside. But that I would definitely recommend. Keep up on not just the fun AI, the front end stuff or RAG and some of those tools, but also even the no code, low code. Let that enable, much faster development. And then you can hang out with the rest of your time for things that take a little bit more. And then there's so many different opportunities. Code gen is so important. GitHub Copilot is very important. Supplement that with certain questions that you can ask directly of the. In terms of the big language models, Perplexity you hear that mentioned in some circles, but a lot of people don't realize how good that is. And Perplexity should be in your Google searches, and use that to for anything that's real time. Current news, I use it for recommending certain packages that I might do in different things that I'm working on. Great, very fast response. And I don't even pay for them. I'm still using the free version of that. So that's worth considering. ChatGPT, Claude is really good.
And you say Claude, an AI tool?
Yeah, Claude, Claude. And Anthropic is the company behind it. So Claude.ai. And it's one of your probably top 3. It's changing pretty rapidly, but that's ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini from Google. But the other one that is mind-blowing, that's really worth looking at, is Grok. And that's Grok with the Q, not Grok, not Elon Musk's Grok with the K, GROQ.com. And what they're doing, it's amazing. So now, there's so many things to talk about. But Meta has released Llama 3 just a few weeks ago. And they have 2 main models that are out. I don't think the 400 billion size, the largest one, is out quite yet. But they have, and Grok makes it available. It's open source, which is different than these other ones I just mentioned are closed source. Okay. And so you can go to meta.ai, but you can also, many people are taking that, fine-tuning it and enriching it. It's made available to the public. But Grok is a hardware platform. So you hear back in the day, you had CPUs, and then you get into GPUs, which is fascinating, right? We knew it from the graphics processing units, but the GPUs turned out to be the best processor for performance for the AI world. And there's a couple new ones, TPU, but the Grok uses what they call an LPU, a logistics processing unit. It's another hardware one, and it's incredibly fast. So you're used to watching these other ones that take 2 or 3 or 4 seconds, or sometimes you kind of do something else while you wait for a long response, and it's back sub-second. And they're more showing off the hardware than anything else. But it also gives you an opportunity to work with the Llama 3 models, and they have some other models available.
Got it.
Yep. So those are good day-to-day models that I go back and forth between. Sometimes Google.com, sometimes Perplexity, sometimes ChatGPT, sometimes Grok, and sometimes the others.
And I'm guessing next month, there's going to be some more really interesting things coming out because the people are exploring it. Yeah. Wow. Well, man, Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing with us all about generative AI. I'm sitting here drinking from the fire hose, just learning at the same time. So I know our listeners are fascinated by this show. How can people follow you or follow your work in the best way?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm not too active there. You can get me Scott Forsyth. But LinkedIn is where I spend more of my time. So just on LinkedIn, search for Scott Forsyth, Forsyth. I think I'm going to be pretty well a top choice there. I mentioned AI engineer in my title. So that's where you'll see the most from me. And I'm happy to hear from people and be able to respond to any questions or discussion in that too. So love to keep in touch.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeffrey.
My pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.